welcome to the Manga Cafe for what is, for me, the last time of the year. Thought I would do something a little special and do a sort of manga year in review. So, in 2022, I started using a planner for the first time, and I didn't so much use it to write down my plans as I used it to write down all of the volumes of manga and other books that I read throughout the year. As of right now, I've read about 180 books this year, and I think about 16 of them were not volumes of manga or other kind of graphic novels. So, I thought I would go through my lists for each month and tell you everything that I read in the manga world this year, and kind of let you know which ones are and are not worth your time, or which ones I think I am and am not going to read more of. I don't know, this might be a really long thing, so if I have to, I'll split it up into 2 parts. So there's a chance you might be watching this and this is only part 1, but if it's the whole thing, then I'm going to cut this all out and you won't even know that I had the idea of making it a 2-parter. So in January, the first manga I was reading was Spy Family. I got through volumes 5 through 8 this year. I feel like I don't even need to say very much about this series. It's hugely popular right now. The first season of the anime just recently wrapped up. And I feel like if you have like even the slightest awareness of this series, you know whether or not you're going to be into it. I think it's great, it's really funny, it's really nice. Honestly, I kind of think it's funnier in the manga format than it is in the anime format. So if you like the anime, I'd say it's still absolutely worth a read. Sometimes I think the jokes land better in print than they do in animation. January also represents the time when I was getting deeply into To Your Eternity. Just in January I read volumes 5 through 9, but throughout this year I would end up getting through, I think, about volume 17. I got into this one and I was immediately hooked. I love it. I think it's a really fascinating series because the creator also made a silent voice before this, and this represents a huge genre shift from like a high school drama type of series into like a huge sweeping like centuries long epic fantasy, and I think it's really good. Anybody watching who like remembers my old Twilight Zone videos would probably remember the one where like I rambled for a long time about the idea of immortality in fiction, and To Your Eternity is a really good example of immortality in fiction. To me, it's like a great entry into that kind of fiction. I do kind of think it's a series that the creator is making up as she goes along, because there are definitely like some concepts that'll like come up and then not really justify their existence, I guess. Or, you know, they just kind of like disappear off the face of the earth. Like, this will be mild spoilers, I guess, but there is like a character who knows the immortal main character and grows old and dies, and as she's dying she has this wish to be made into something that is useful to the main guy, and we see her like get reincarnated into this young woman and then never get mentioned again in the whole rest of the series, like over 10 volumes later. And yet she's been like featured in the cover artwork of various volumes like once or twice. So, I don't know. Maybe that's gonna become relevant again somehow, but I have no idea. But yeah, this one is an absolutely high priority series for me. Every time a new volume comes into the Manga Cafe, I have to read it immediately. In fact, when volume 17 came out, we only got one copy of that volume delivered, and so I placed it on a reservation for myself so that nobody else could read it or buy it until after I was done with it. It was that important. I didn't know if I was going to get another copy of that one, so I had to read it. Also in January I read the first volume of Fist of the North Star. I actually own that one. Yeah, so I guess since I'm kind of a manga curator of sorts, I should probably indicate not only if I recommend a series, but if I personally bought it, added it to my collection. So the first one that I did that with was Fist of the North Star. I think I actually owned this for some time before January, but just didn't get around to reading it until then. It's the only volume I own as of now, but I think that like 6 or 7 are out in English. So in January I was on volume 2 of this other fantasy series that was recommended to me, actually connected to those old Twilight Zone videos I made. This one's called Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, or Frieren After the Funeral, or something like that. The English localization calls it Frieren Beyond Journey's End. But like To Your Eternity, it's another series that has a lot to do with immortality. This one is in a more like traditional like Western high fantasy setting, so like elves and dwarves and wizards and warriors are around. This is a series though where like I'm constantly on the fence of whether I want to continue reading it. Usually like I'll pick up a new volume and I'll be like, you know, this isn't great. And then like something will happen by the end of that volume where I'm like, okay, I'll keep reading this. That one had an anime adaptation announced recently, so that might be a good way to check it out if you're curious. But yeah, in my opinion, I definitely think it's weaker than To Your Eternity. The premise of this one is basically that it's about an elf who was in an adventuring party that slew the Demon King and saved the world, and it's kind of about her dealing with how she keeps on living while her adventuring friends are growing older and dying. And I don't know, in my opinion, I don't think it does a lot with that premise a lot of the time. It goes on a lot of tangents, like, oh, now the main characters have to take a magic licensing exam and like go through all these trials, and that's gonna take several volumes. And I don't feel like, you know, this is as emotionally driven of a story as something like To Your Eternity. And like, I'm not that crazy about the artwork. I mean, it's well drawn, but I feel like the characters are not very expressive in it. They tend to have like very flat facial expressions, even when they're having like some exaggerated reaction to something. So I don't know. It has a lot going for it, but I don't know, one of these volumes I might end up dropping that one. Oh, this is interesting. In January, I started this like rom-com manga called When Will Ayumu Make His Move? This is like a shogi-oriented rom-com. I like it pretty well. I don't know the first thing about shogi, but I saw the volumes on the shelf and I was like, yeah, this looks kind of cute, I'll try it. And like, it's pretty good. Most of the gags devolve into like, the girl character will say something teasy to the boy character, and then he'll say something like really straightforward about how he has a crush on her, and she'll get all flustered. And that happens about 10 million times in this series. Now I have read like 8 volumes of it in total. But it's a super quick read. I usually finish a volume the same day that I pick it up. It's a very quick book to read on a break at the manga cafe. I know that this artist is also known for this other series, which I have not read or watched, which is Teasing Master Takagi-san, something like that. But I heard that people love that series. I might give it a try one of these days. In January, I was on Volume 5 of Dungeon Meshi, or the English title is Delicious in Dungeon. This is another one of those series where, like, for a long time I was on the fence about whether I wanted to continue it. The basic premise of that one is it's about an adventuring party going down into a dungeon in, like, a pretty typical Western high fantasy setting. The gimmick being that in order to save money, they decide not to take any food supplies down to the dungeon with them, and instead decide to cook and eat the monsters that they find along the way. And it's pretty good. There's this dwarf character who is great. He's basically the chef of the party, and so, like, every chapter or so you get, like, a recipe by him about how you cook the monster of the week. And it's kind of like a legitimate, like, recipe that you could follow if this monster existed. That one also had an anime announced. I don't know if any kind of release date is confirmed on that or anything, but I'm definitely looking forward to that. And I gotta say, even though I was, like, kind of so-so on the series as I started it, once it gets into the later volumes, like, I would say around, like, volume 6 or 7, I could not put it down. The plot actually gets really engaging and, like, really good. So, like, even more than I want to see more of the, like, monster cooking gimmick, I want to see where the story actually progresses. Because, like, especially in the most recent English volumes, like 10 and 11, it goes through some, like, wild twists and turns, and I cannot wait to see where it goes next. I have some very similar things to say about the next manga I read. I was on Hat Atelier Volume 2 back in January, and now I'm on, like, Volume 4 or 5. That is one of those series where every time I pick up a volume of it, I think to myself, why have I not read more of this? It's so good. It's a pretty ordinary fantasy story. Takes place in a world where wizards exist. Well, in this universe, they're all referred to as witches, whether they're male or female. The main character, Coco, is this little girl who isn't a witch, but one day she witnesses a witch doing some magic, and she gets wrapped up in this forbidden magic herself. Her mom gets turned to stone, and so she is basically, like, forced to become a witch in the hopes of getting her mom saved. But outside of that, like, pretty standard plot, it's got, like, such a cool level of artistry to it. Like, every illustration is beautiful in it. It's got a pretty cool magic system, which looks similar to, like, the transmutation from Full Metal Alchemist, where the characters have to, like, draw a circle and then, like, fill it with different markings to make a pattern, which generates a specific effect, which is, like, very detailed. But the whole setting is just, like, I can't think of any word to describe it more than whimsical. It's just this, like, joyous fantasy setting. And I would say, like, not since something like Harry Potter, like, reading that as a kid, have I more wanted to just, like, live in a fantasy setting. But even so, like, this series ends up being a series that I mostly read when I'm waiting on other volumes of series that I'm more engaged in. It ends up being, like, a very back burner series for me, despite how good I repeatedly think it is. Let's see, it looks like I got Chainsaw Man Volume 9 in January. I definitely, like, bought every English volume of Chainsaw Man throughout the year, all the way up to 11. Still no word yet when we're getting an English version of Volume 12. That doesn't seem to be on the calendar yet. But, I've got every volume of that one. I picked a Volume 10 instead of Volume 11 because Volume 11 has a lot of green on it, and I thought it would not play well with the green screen. I mean because I just think the illustration on Volume 10 is a lot better. That's why. And I don't even need to say anything about Chainsaw Man. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's amazing. Everybody knows. Everybody agrees. The anime is wrapping up as I am shooting this video. The anime is incredible. I am not yet caught up on the Part 2 chapters, though, so no spoilers on that, please. But that is definitely something I need to get caught up on once I catch up on a few other things that I still have at home. February did not see me reading a whole lot of new stuff. I read To Your Eternity Volumes 10 through 16. Got, mostly caught up on that series in February. I read Komi, Volume 17. I am currently up to Volume 22, the latest English volume to come out. I already made a whole video on Komi, so if you want to know more detailed thoughts that I have about that series, you can watch a video on that. Komi is a series where I would say I kind of like the anime more than the manga, weirdly. I mean, I love both, obviously, but the anime seems to make me laugh more than the manga does. I guess just the way they execute some of the timing and like character action stuff really makes it funnier. And then the last manga that I was reading in February, I mean, it is a short month, was got through Dr. Stone Volume 20. I know that Dr. Stone is finished in Japan, but, you know, I usually read physical volumes, so I'm waiting for like 3 more volumes to come out before I finish it. That one's a really good series. Probably most people have heard of Dr. Stone, but if you haven't, the premise is that the whole human race gets turned to stone for about 3,000 years or so, so all of society collapses, and when people start emerging from being turned to stone, it's mostly up to this high school science prodigy to reintroduce technology to the world, starting from nothing. And it kind of ends up being this like shonen, sometimes battle series, sometimes adventure series, where like the power scaling is determined by tech level. You know, if you're the kind of person who will, you know, play games like Civilization or like RimWorld and you really like the idea of a tech tree, Dr. Stone is like a tech tree in narrative manga format. So it's kind of fun to see how they like make all of these different forms of technology starting from absolutely nothing, and how things they make build onto other things that they make later on, and it's all like interconnected as it goes on. Plus, Dr. Stone has great artwork. The artist who works on it, his name is Boichi, and in my opinion, he is one of the most underrated artists working today. We will get later on in this video to another series I read illustrated by him, which just has incredible artwork. Let's see what we had in March. Ayumu Volumes 3 and 4, Frieren Volume 3. I read My Wandering Warrior Existence by Nagatoro. I really like her manga. I still haven't read everything that she's put out, or, you know, everything that's been translated into English, but I started with My Alcoholic Escape from Reality. Loved that. My Wandering Warrior Existence is also great. What she makes is memoir manga, so like everything, at least that's been translated into English by her, is based on her own true life and like real experiences that she has had, and sometimes it's some really heavy and brutal subject matter. Wandering Warrior has a lot to do with like relationships, and like the image on the cover has to do with how, since she has never been married and likely never will be, she went to a photo shoot where she got to dress up in like a wedding gown, and like how excited her mom was just to see her in a wedding dress. And her books are just like really fascinating in how they break down like the way she views interpersonal relationships, especially like romance and sex. Because I gotta say, like, as a straight white man living in America who has never been to Japan and isn't a manga artist or anything, this is weirdly like one of the most relatable things I've ever read. I think that just kind of speaks to how well she communicates her ideas, even across a language barrier. I read Orochi Volume 1, which has started to be put out in English hardcover volumes here in the US. That started in March. I read 3 of those now. You might know the artist Kazuo Umezu, who is perhaps best known for The Drifting Classroom, which I have read all of. It's kind of like a classic of horror, and Orochi is another one of his series. It's sometimes a horror series, sometimes just a sort of supernatural thriller series, but it's like an anthology type of thing. there is a main character named Orochi who is this woman with like vague supernatural powers, and she basically goes around and observes other people's lives and like bizarre stories that happen to other people. And they usually have a dark atmosphere to them, varying levels of horrifying. But you would know this artist as someone who is very influential on like Junji Ito and a lot of modern horror artists. So it's kind of fascinating reading Orochi just for kind of like viewing that time period, like that piece of history that would, you know, predate so much of what we know about horror today. I also started a series in March. It's called Island in a Puddle. That one is by Kei Sanbei. You might know him as the creator of Erased. Erased is a fantastic thriller series. Light supernatural elements in it, but the anime is great. It's only 12 episodes long. It had a live-action series which I watched, which was not great, but I highly recommend reading Erased, even if you've seen the anime and you love it, because the anime was made when the final volume of the manga was still yet to be written, and so the two of them have pretty different endings. Oh, but it was Island in a Puddle that I read, actually, not Erased. I read Erased a couple years back or so. Island in a Puddle is a new thriller series by him. It's only 5 volumes in total. As of me shooting this video, Volume 5 is not out yet in English, so I've only read the first 4 volumes. I gotta say, since Erased, it kind of seems like he's trying to catch that same lightning in a bottle that he had with that series. Because, like, every series that I've seen from him since Erased has been, like, you know, murder, mystery, thriller, having to do with a light supernatural element, and involves adults and children, like their relationships, and some kind of like body swap, you know, like an adult mind in a child's body or a child's mind in an adult's body. And that's kind of the premise of Island in a Puddle. It's that one day, this is like in chapter 1, this like 10-year-old kid and this hitman mysteriously swap bodies. And so it's about, like, you know, this hitman trying to lay low at this kid's family, and the kid, like, being in the body of an adult hitman who is on the run from the law, trying to deal with that. It's pretty good. I mean, I would recommend it, but it's definitely no Erased. And I kind of wish this artist would, like, stop trying to recapture that same thing he had with this finished series, and just make something, like, completely different. Or, I mean, maybe go back to his old days when he made booby manga. Maybe he'd be happier then. I read an interview recently that the creator of Spy Family said that he's basically still making that manga because of how popular it is, and it's not really what he feels passionately about drawing. And, well, I've seen the manga that he made before Spy Family, so I think I know what he feels passionately about. Maybe he'll get to end Spy Family one day and continue chasing his dream. What else do we got? Dungeon Meshi 6 and 7 in March. In March I read Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan. This one went, like, mildly viral when the anime came out. It's basically about a guy who is on, like, a children's entertainment TV program, and he constantly sneaks in these messages about how life is actually oppressive and terrible, and being an adult is a nightmare. I only read the first volume of this one. It was one of those kind of like double volume type of deals, and I'm probably not going to read any more of it, honestly, because, like, it's a pretty funny premise, you know, I like it pretty well, but as I got towards the end of the volume, I kind of started to get this feel of, like, you know, it's about all of these, like, miserable adult characters, like, in or approaching their 30s, and it's just this, like, endless cycle of depression for all of them, where, like, they're all just, like, hating their lives, and it got a little, like, genuinely depressing to read after a while. It kind of ceased to be funny after so much time, and just became more like, man, I feel really bad for these people. Like, you can only have so many sarcastic remarks about how life is miserable and oppressive before you start to realize, oh man, none of this is sarcasm, is it? And kind of once you hit that point, it's just like, you know, you don't really want to keep reading about these characters who are miserable, but also not doing anything to lessen the misery in their lives. They're just kind of coping with it day after day. Chainsaw Man Volume 10 was there in March. Oh, and another one that I kind of want to highlight here, one that I bought. So this came out in March. It was called Sheeply Horned Witch Romi. This is Volume 1. It is just such a fascinating series that I had to buy Volume 1 as soon as I read it. I don't really know anything about this artist, it's Yoichi Abe, but the art style in this manga is just kind of like fascinating. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find images of it to put in the background, but if I do, then, you know, you don't have to try and look at these pages that I have in front of me. But it's just, like, a really cool style. Like, it's got really thick, dark lines to it. Like, I love the looks of the characters. And it's just this, like, bizarre fantasy story where it's basically like these two main characters wake up in their school one day and find that every other person in the world is asleep, and Romi has these sheep horns, and they're described as being weirdly squishy for whatever reason. And so it's just kind of about the two of them, like, living in this school where the whole world is asleep, and towards the end of this volume, you start to learn more about the characters, and you kind of learn about, like, how frustrated Romi was with the world around her before this catastrophic sleep event happened. And I'm really intrigued to read more of this one, but for whatever reason, the volumes are coming out really far apart. Like I said, this Volume 1 came out in March of 2022, and Volume 2 is not expected to come out until summer of 2023. It's like an unbelievably long release gap. So I don't know, I have no idea if this will ever be made into an anime or any kind of adaptation like that, but if you're looking for something like a little more obscure, a little lesser known that is in print in English, I would definitely recommend this one, because, like, it's very intriguing. I cannot wait to see where this one goes. Alright, it's April time. Let's see, I read Spy Family Volume 7. I read Kaiju No. 8, Volume 2 in April. Currently up to Volume 4 on that one. That one, I think, is going to be, like, the next big shonen series. Not a whole lot of people are talking about it yet, but the manga has been pretty popular from what I've seen. And it has had an anime confirmed. Don't know yet when that's coming. But yeah, I do think Kaiju No. 8 is likely to be the next big thing, no pun intended. Because it's very much got elements of things like, you know, Chainsaw Man and Demon Slayer and things like that. Very, like, regular shonen series. I guess if I'm going to compare it to Chainsaw Man, it's probably more accurate to compare it to something like Devilman, because that's kind of like the tradition that Chainsaw Man is following. But, you know, it's like, it takes place in a world where kaiju constantly invade Japan, kaiju exist, and they're like a daily threat people have to deal with. The main character, one day, through mishaps, acquires kaiju transformation powers, and uses his kaiju powers to fight other kaiju on the side of humans. So it's very much in that tradition of Devilman. But, you know, it's got good action scenes and good characters. I think one thing that I've heard draws a lot of people to the series is that the character is not like a teenager. He's actually like a 30-year-old dude who kind of feels like his career is a dead end. He always wanted to be in like the kaiju defense force, but was never good enough to make it. So he instead just kind of works as like a kaiju cleanup crew guy. Until, of course, he gets his kaiju powers, and the Kaiju Defense Force starts accepting older applicants. So he kind of goes into that while also trying to keep his kaiju powers a secret. That one's very good. If you're into shonen, I would highly recommend that one, wholeheartedly. Let's see, Komi number 18 was in April. Nagatoro volume 10 was in April. I've read like 13 of those in total. I know a lot of people have like mixed feelings about that series, but it is one of my like drop everything and read type of manga. It warms my heart in places that I didn't know my heart could still feel warmth. I like the anime too. Basically, like, I don't know. If you don't know anything about this series, you know, it's a pretty straightforward, like, rom-com type of series. The main girl, Nagatoro, it's kind of like an inverse of a Komi situation, where instead of having this like super meek and quiet girl who can like barely talk to people, the main girl is instead this like outgoing loudmouth character who is like practically bullying the main dude at the beginning, and you kind of realize very quickly that, oh, maybe she actually has a kind of secret crush on him, and oh, what if he actually has a secret crush on her too? And yeah, this series was first pitched to me by a patron of the Manga Cafe who said to me, like, you know, I liked Komi a lot, but then I read Nagatoro, and I'm all about Nagatoro, and at the time I was like, how could anybody betray Komi this way? But then I read it too, and I was like, man, friendship with Komi ended, now Nagatoro is my best friend. But yeah, that visitor to the Manga Cafe pitched it to me that the thing that makes Nagatoro better is that the two characters' relationship actually goes places, you know, it actually advances, at least at a much faster rate than the romantic relationship in Komi, which, you know, some 300 chapters in is still barely moving at all. But, yeah, I mean, long story short, I think Nagatoro just resonates with me because, like, the character Nagatoro reminds me a lot of somebody I used to know and was, like, really close friends with, and so it's very much just, like, a personal resonation type of thing with me. It reminds me of better times in my own life, and so I must read every new volume as soon as it comes out. But the English publication of it has had some frustrations with me in the last few years. So it's published by Vertical Comics, which is an imprint of Kodansha, and Kodansha's localization in 2022 has been kind of a mess. They have been characterized by long delays of a lot of their volumes. A lot of their like planned releases, you know, have release dates and then get pushed back like months and months and months, like indefinitely even. There was supposed to be a Nagatoro box set, which I was going to buy, that was going to come out in November, and that got pushed back to January. So I don't have that yet. But yeah, the release schedule for these volumes has been so weird, because there was like a long, like, Nagatoro drought at some point, and then they released like 3 volumes within like a month or two of each other, just like really suddenly. Like, I don't know, they're having all kinds of like inconsistencies like that lately for some reason. They must have like some kind of internal problems going on. You can't even look at a release schedule on their website as I'm recording this, just because all of their release dates ended up so scattered and inconsistent. Anyway, yeah, Nagatoro is my one, like, trash indulgence that I allow myself. I just love it. I could possibly make a longer video on it in the future, or I might just quietly read it in my own little goblin hole by myself. Moving on, I read Uncle from Another World. I'm up to volume 5 on that one, I believe. I think that is a super underrated series. It had a Netflix anime come out, which is also quite good. The Japanese voice actor for the main uncle character is also the voice actor of Dio Brando, so you gotta love that. You basically get to watch that and pretend that you're hearing Dio Brando geeking out over old Sega games, which is a treasure. Yeah, the premise of this one, I'm not really an isekai fan, and so this one is like an isekai parody, but it's pretty great. This main character, the uncle of, well, he's the main character's uncle, but like uncle himself is basically the main character. He was in a coma for 17 years, and he came out of that coma with actual magical powers, and he told his nephew and his nephew's friends all about his time in the fantasy world he was in. And so, probably like a majority of chapters of this manga are flashback chapters to this fantasy world. A lot of chapters just consist of all of the characters sitting at a table and Uncle going, here's some cool shit that happened to me in the fantasy world, and they watch like a video replay of it. It's great because it's like, it subverts a lot of tropes. Like there's this tsundere love interest character in the fantasy world, but Uncle was totally oblivious to her feelings for him. He thinks she's just a big asshole. And it also kind of plays on that trope of, like, the isekai protagonist using their intricate video game knowledge to help them get by in the fantasy world. But all of Uncle's video game knowledge is from, like, old Sega Genesis and Saturn games. So the knowledge that he has to help him survive is things like how you trick the AI in Golden Axe to fall down pits when they're approaching you. Which, by the way, was a real, legitimate, genuine trick in Golden Axe. I did that exact thing myself as a kid. But yeah, the thing that makes me sad with Uncle from Another World is not a lot of people buy the manga. At least not in my area. Like, I never see people buying these volumes in the manga cafe. It's weird because, like, everybody I know who has actually read it, or actually watched the anime, has loved it. I think it's great, but people just aren't picking it up for whatever reason. Speaking of, I haven't read any of Mob Psycho, but I've noticed that nobody really buys volumes of Mob Psycho either. Everybody wants to watch it, everybody loves the anime is great, and I'm really surprised more people don't buy the manga volumes. At least, you know, in my experience in my area, I don't see people buying the manga volumes. In April, I also read Volume 1 of Sakamoto Days. This one was kind of an anticipated series. I think it's very much in the vein of things like Spy Family, where it's like, extraordinary person is put in situation where they have to live ordinary life. In this case, it's a hitman who decided he wanted to retire, have a family, and run a convenience store. And so it's about a lot of mishaps where, like, his old hitman life kind of, like, comes back to haunt him, and he has to, like, reluctantly deal with that while trying to leave his life of violence behind him. And it's a comedic series. I only read one volume of it. I wasn't that into it. I got a strong urge that Sakamoto Days exists because of series like Spy Family and like The Way of the House Husband. I mean, Sakamoto Days even has a telepath character, just like Spy Family, and I'm like, does it really need to be that similar? So I don't know, I mean, if you like that kind of series and you wish there was more of it in the world, then I think Sakamoto Days would be a good read for you. Personally, I get my fill from things like Spy Family, and so I don't think I'm really going to pick up more of that one. I read Volume 2 of a series called Crueler Than Dead in April. Didn't really know much of anything about this one going into it, except Volume 1 came out around Halloween of the previous year, so I figured I would read Volume 2 because Volume 2 was the final volume. I really can't say much about it. It's about the most generic zombie story I think I've ever read. If it was any longer than 2 volumes, I think I would not have finished it. even having read Volume 1, I was like, I hope this is going somewhere interesting. And then I learned it only had one more volume in total, and so I was like, well, I guess it's not going to have time to go anywhere interesting. And it didn't. Man, April had a lot of one-and-dones for me, because here comes Kubo Won't Let Me Be Invisible, Volume 1. That one has an anime starting in winter of 2023, believe it or not. I think this is very much in the vein of series like Komi and Nagatoro, where it's kind of like Dream Girl manga, where it's like you have a pretty ordinary male main character who has this like fascinating female character come into his life and like change everything and be this like mind-blowing love interest that everyone is jealous of. And it's like, with Kubo, I don't know, I wasn't that into it. I only read one volume. The premise of that one is like the main male character is a guy that like people never notice. He's just like very generic of a person. People tend to like not even notice him, you know, like the teacher doesn't notice when he raises his hand in class or like forgets to call his name for roll call, stuff like that. But the only person who does notice him is the most beautiful girl in the class, and her name is Kubo, and for whatever reason, she's the only one who actively notices him and actually takes an interest in him. And to me, the kind of like, I guess, romance of it comes way too easy. I feel like she just immediately loves the main male character, like, not really for any reason that I could see, but just because the manga needs to happen. So, like, I don't think she's a very interesting character, and I don't think he's a very interesting character. I don't think there's an interesting drama or, like, dynamic between them. But I don't know, maybe that's just me. Maybe an unpopular opinion. I didn't hate it. I just feel like, kind of like Sakamoto Days, where I feel like I get more out of other similar series that I don't think I need yet another one in my life. And lastly for April, I read a classic, Apollo's Song by Osamu Tezuka. I haven't really read very much by Tezuka, honestly. This might have been the first manga of his that I like sat down and read beginning to end. I don't think I've ever really done more than glance through any other series that he's made. But this one was great. I mean, it's a single volume collection, and it's basically this like sprawling philosophical examination of the nature of love among the human race. This like very thought-provoking exploration of interpersonal relationships. And, you know, even knowing Tezuka's enormous reputation going into this, it was still a really good read. I definitely had that fear of like, oh, you know, he's such a big name, I'm probably going to be holding this manga to an enormous standard as I'm reading it. But like, even for its older time period, it was still like a really good and even like thought-provoking manga today. So if you're like me and you've never really read much Tezuka, I'd say Apollo's Song is a fine starting point. Let's see, in May, we mostly had the continuing series I was already in the middle of, Dr. Stone Volume 21, Ayumu Volume 5, Dungeon Meshi Volumes 9 and 10, Frieren 4, Chainsaw Man 11. Other than those, I started a new series called Crazy Food Truck. I don't know what the Japanese title might be, maybe it is Crazy Food Truck. And 2 volumes of that are out so far as I'm recording this, and it's pretty good so far. I like it. It's in kind of a post-apocalypse wasteland setting, kind of a Mad Max or like Fist of the North Star type of thing. The main character is this like 60-ish-year-old dude who owns and operates a food truck. He one day discovers this girl lying in a body bag on the side of the road, and he kind of like rescues her, and you kind of find out that both of these characters have sordid pasts. Both he and she are kind of on the run from the law, or like, you know, the military of this world. She has some level of like super strength. I think it might have also been implied she was like, I don't know, an android or artificial life form or something like that. And you find out that the guy, his name is Gordon, he has this past that he was in the military and some kind of mysterious bad stuff happened with him. So, still a lot of mysteries unfolding in that one, but it is pretty good. Kind of like Kaiju No. 8, I like that it has an older main character. This one is like twice as old as the guy in Kaiju No. 8 though, which makes it pretty interesting. It's got, you know, pretty good action scenes so far, and also has a lot of fan service if you're into that. You know, the main female character finds an excuse to get naked in just about every chapter, but that one is good. I would give that one a solid, positive recommendation. I would read more. I read another single volume manga called Witches. I believe the artist's name on that one was Daisuke Igarashi, but that one was pretty fascinating. As the simple title indicates, it is all about witches, both in past times and present day, like all over the world, but it has this like very like unique style to it. Some of the illustrations are kind of rough, but some of them are also like very intricate and detailed and like fascinating and gruesome. There's not really anything like it out there. It's kind of a horror series at times, but it's just kind of this like fascinating setting where like there are forces of nature in the world so much older than the human race, and it's basically like, you know, you would do well to treat these forces with deference or else they could destroy you. Like that kind of thing. And it's also kind of an anthology book. It has like several different stories throughout the volume. That one was quite good, especially if you want like kind of a realistic vision of magic and that kind of like somewhat dark fantasy modern setting. Definitely a unique read that I would recommend to the right person. And a volume 1 that I tried in, hold on, what are we on, May now? That I tried in May was called Colorless. And I don't know if I'm gonna read more of this one. Volume 2 just recently came out, but it's got a pretty cool gimmick. It's in like kind of a sci-fi cyberpunk setting, and I think it's by a debut artist also. The premise is basically that color has literally been removed from the world, which is a pretty convenient plot device when you're making a manga that is black and white. But the cool gimmick in Colorless is that the main character has a secret stash of color, and somehow he uses that in his weapons and like fights people with it. And there are people who want to find it and destroy it, of course. So you just get like a few occasional pages where there is just one color used. It's this kind of like turquoise or like teal color. And so that was a really cool, like unexpected thing to see, was these like really like little small accents of color used in this otherwise completely black and white manga. Okay, so I got partway through shooting this and I was like, yeah, this is definitely gonna have to be split into a two-parter. So this is gonna be the end of part 1 of my 2022 yearly recap. Stay tuned for part 2 of the yearly recap, coming soon.